Blueprint to Your Success Story, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chuback, physician and surgeon from New Jersey. I'm Dr. Paul Reeves, your host and moderator, also host of Dr. Paul's Family Talk radio show. Also as part of the panel, Dr. Diane Chuback, CEO of Chuback Medical Group, and Dr. Deborah Waitley, psychologist and author from California. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we take you through the entire book, The Blueprint to Your Success Story, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chuback, MD. Welcome to the Blueprint to Your Success Story, Episode 10, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chuback. So let's welcome him to the show this morning from New Jersey, physician, surgeon, Dr. John A. Chuback. Greetings, Dr. Chuback. How are you today?
Hi, Paul. Doing well. Thank you. How about yourself?
So far, so good. Would you like to make a couple of comments about a few missing people today and how we'll get them back one of these days soon?
Yeah, unfortunately, Dr. Deborah Waitley and Dr. Diane Chuback were not able to make today's program, but we figured that the two of us will muddle along without them and do our best. It won't be quite the same, I'm sure, but we want to get through our words and get through the book and keep our listeners engaged. So I'm sure we'll see one or both of them back in the very near future, and look forward to having them because they always add a lot to the discussion and the consideration of these different words.
Oh, definitely. So now you and I have never had an issue with filling content. We can both speak for hours on end without interruption. No issue there.
That's for sure. We do enjoy a good discourse and a good banter. So I think today will be no different.
Yep. The only thing missing is the two other points of view, but we'll get them back. And maybe when they watch this show, they'll say, well, we better never miss another show again. These guys are too good. You never know.
Or they may be like, we better get back there.
Exactly.
These guys are not going to make it.
That's more likely the case.
Yeah. It's hard to have a band with just a keyboard and a drummer.
That's right.
You use a couple more pieces, but we're going to get through it, I'm sure.
All right, sir. First word on tap today is individuality. Take it from there.
Okay, sure. Individuality is a noun, and the definition is the quality that makes one person or thing different from all others. Successes very often are titans of individuality. By definition, if you win, you've set yourself apart from the crowd. By strict definition, the winner is the person who comes in first. Of course, for the purposes of this book, and philosophically speaking, winning is much more than that. But still, successful people always stand out in some way. Winners stand out from the crowd in that they're highly successful as compared to others in their time or culture. You must possess great self-confidence to express fully your individual strengths and positive attributes. It's hard to win in a corner. It's hard to win from within someone else's shadow. Winners are known for having exceptional skill sets, whether they're in business, law, medicine, sports, invention, the fine arts, music, etc. It is crucial the highly successful individual also works well with their peers and colleagues, but not in a way that forces them to lose their own identity amongst the group. Think long and hard about what your strengths are. Foster these unique capabilities and allow them to make you shine in the marketplace. Where you have weaknesses, work equally as hard to strengthen those areas as well, so you will be known as an individual with a robust set of talents and few, if any, chinks in your armor. This is a wonderfully fulfilling process. Let people see your greatness, and it will take you farther than you believe you can go. And then we come to a quote from Ai Weiwei, who was born in 1957 and still living, a Chinese-born artist and activist, who said, "The American experience influenced my understanding of individuality, basic human rights, freedom of expression, and the rights and responsibilities of citizens." Which is a pretty powerful quote.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And that's one of those areas I've never seen anybody personally or even on TV or through the movies who was individually great without seeking to be individually great. And a lot of times those people, take shots from other people. Well, they should. You even put it in your description there. You have to learn to work well with others. You have to work well on committees. Personally, I was never a committee guy. I figured I probably knew what to do, and if I didn't, I'd find out. I would ask other people, but to sit around hours on end with a committee, when as an individual, I thought, I could probably get this done in about 2 minutes instead of sitting through a meeting of 3 hours. And so there's always that line that's sometimes drawn. And in the world of education, which is my background, we have everything needs to be studied, ad nauseum for as long as is humanly possible before it's 1% implemented. You can't change the world overnight. I was even told one time, well, if you want to do that, form a committee, and that committee will form another committee, and within 3 years, you'll have a recommendation. And I would say, well, 3 years is a long time because the kids that it will affect will be 3 years older. They will have missed out on everything that could have happened in their lives. And well, that's just the way it goes. That's the way we do it. So what do you recommend for people like that? Now, obviously, as an individual, you are highly successful, but you've also learned to work well in teams, whether in medical school or at the hospital or even at your practice. Even though you're the sole physician, you still have a team, a large team of people there. How do you put all that together as an individual and as a team player?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and that's the key balance. We need to maintain our individuality and our individual personality, characteristics, strengths, charisma, etc. But we do have to learn to work in teams. I mean, generally speaking, just about everything is team oriented, even the things that appear to be individually related. Of course, in medicine and surgery, it's very much team-based. You may have a team leader, quote unquote, as the surgeon, the so-called captain of the ship inside of the operating room. But then you do have assistants and technicians, and in some cases for bigger operations. For example, when I was doing open heart surgery, of course, you had an anesthesiologist, you had an assistant surgeon, you had a scrub nurse, you had a circulating nurse, you had 2 technicians working at the heart-lung machine, and potentially several more people than that, second assistants, and so on and so forth. So you do have to learn to shine within the structure of a team, and you want to create the kind of team where each individual has that ability, not just the team leader, but there's a esprit de corps within the team, which is allowing everyone to be themselves, but within the framework of an overall objective. But we don't want to get lost as sort of nameless, faceless cogs in a wheel, as Ai Weiwei points out, especially in American culture and American society. We really cherish the value of the individual, and we hope to bring that out as much as possible. It can't go to the point where it becomes disruptive or dysfunctional and begins to offset the balance of the team and again disrupt the overall goal, direction, and ambition of what it is that you've set out to achieve. But you do want to have everybody shine in their own way and give them an opportunity for self-expression within that rubric. So it is complicated. There's no question it's a complex process.
Now, as a surgeon, so you're in the operating room, you're physically operating on somebody, and something goes a little askew, something you didn't plan on, some unforeseen issue arises. In your case, you probably knew exactly what to do, but let's just pretend for a moment you were 50-50 on one procedure or another. You would certainly ask your assistant surgeon, the head nurse, or however the team is formulated. She might have a couple of opinions, like, I saw a doctor with this exact issue last week, and here's what he or she did. But the bottom line is you're the head guy. And as one president one time said, somebody has to make the decision, and I'm the decider. And so you can take all the teamwork input, but at some point, you would have to make that decision, right?
The buck stops here, as the old expression goes.
Yeah.
Right. So that's exactly right. I think that the person who's in a situation like that, the surgeon is the team leader and can open the forum to discussion, brainstorming, ideas, etc. But it would be at the discretion of the leader of the group. In that case, the primary surgeon. The primary surgeon may say, in a systematic way, beginning frequently, let's say in a large operation where there were a second surgeon, well-trained, competent second surgeon, may say to that person, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts here? Do you have any ideas? And then, depending on what the problem was, potentially ask the anesthesiologist, the heart-lung technicians, and kind of go down a checklist of people within the operating room based on what the surgeon felt each individual could potentially bring to that situation, which would be most valuable and most expedient. But as you pointed out, Paul, generally speaking, as a fully trained board-certified surgeon, a huge part of the training is anticipation and management of unforeseen and unwanted circumstances and complications. That is an enormous part of board certification examinations, not just simply how do you diagnose and remove an appendix. More typically, in an oral board situation, the question would be, well, how do you diagnose and remove an appendix? And then you go through all of that fundamental information, and then you get inside the abdomen and you find that there is no appendix. And then the question becomes, now what?
Yeah.
The patient is obviously sick, has a fever, has abdominal pain, has an elevated white blood cell count. So what's next on your checklist? Very much like I always liken it to the role of a pilot, professional pilot, commercial pilot, and pilot of any kind, quite frankly, but it's very much a checklist kind of mentality. And in the training of pilots, of course, when they go for their certifications in the simulators and so forth, that's a lot of what they're coping with. Is not just how to fly a plane from Newark to Miami on a beautiful sunny day. The question is, what happens when a storm arises? What happens when you've lost the engine? What happens when you've lost the flaps? What happens when the landing gear won't go down? What happens when you have an unruly passenger on board, et cetera, et cetera. It's problem management and crisis management which sets the individual apart in terms of their excellence and expertise, which brings us back to the concept of the individual. So, again, it's a fascinating subject, and it's a subject that obviously I have a tremendous amount of personal experience with.
Right. What I always tried to do, because I was in leadership forever, that's basically what I did my whole career in education, is you even mentioned a few moments ago, developing leaders within the team and developing individuality within the team. And one of the techniques I grasped onto a little bit accidentally, but then it worked, so I kept using it, was a woman on staff, a teacher, at a staff meeting, 50 people in a meeting. She says, well, I have a question. Her question was a complaint, basically, about something, which is not a good scenario for complaints. We don't handle complaints in meetings with 50 people, because then you have 50 opinions and you could be there till midnight. So after she expressed her thoughts on whatever the issue was, which I didn't really agree with, but I wasn't going to tell her in that form, I said, so how do you recommend we resolve that one? And she looked at me blankly, and a nice person, by the way, and she said, I really have no idea. And I said, okay, why don't you give us some thought, and why don't you come and see me tomorrow, maybe we can brainstorm, and then we'll talk about it at the next meeting. Well, that was like the sun had risen over the entire building, because it set off a storm in a good way. People realized, wait a minute, I can bring something up, but if I have a solution, he's going to let me run with it. And the answer was yes. Now, we might not implement it. It might get to the point where, I like what you've done, but it's just not going to work with these kids or in this situation. But developing as the leader, which you are, developing the team underneath you to be individuals as well is so crucial too, isn't it?
It's everything. You want people who are, sentient beings, so to speak. You want them to feel, and you want them to think, and you want them to be able to express themselves. And but there has to be a proper form, as you point out. There has to be a proper process, because you can't have it turn into a pirate ship either.
Right.
And sometimes every leader feels like the captain of a pirate ship, that there's always a mutiny mounting.
Yeah.
So we want to be respectful to everyone on the team, and giving them an opportunity to express themselves, their wishes, their desires, their concerns, their complaints. But it has to be done in an organized and meaningful way, so that progress can be made, not just for the sake of belly aching, so to speak, or
right.
Kind of unloading emotional baggage on the rest of the team. So that's part of what being a professional is in any given situation, any profession, etc. And that as a band leader. I mean, in orchestras and so forth, you have a large number of people working together in harmony, so to speak, quite literally, and in unison and with an overall plan. But everybody plays their role. The timpani drums has one role, and the triangle has certainly another. But they're both necessary, given the piece of music that you're trying to perform. But somebody has to be at the head of that process. That doesn't mean there's not a first chair violin, but the other violinists have an important role too. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there.
Right. I go back to something my dad told me when I was a kid. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and he was the manager of my baseball team. So it's kind of a built-in benefit there. But I was talking about the team over and over, and he finally said, "You realize baseball is not really a team sport, don't you?" I'd already thought about that, but not to the degree he had, obviously. And I said, "Well, tell me more." Basically, he said, "Well, when you go up to bat," he goes, "who helps you swing the bat?" And I said, "Well, nobody." He goes, "Right, you're on your own. You're an individual. If a ground ball is hit to you at shortstop, who helps you field that ball?" Well, nobody. He goes, "That's right. You're an individual out there." He said, "You're part of the team, but you're also an individual. And if you don't bring the individual strengths to the game, you will let the team down." So that might be another way to look at it. Yes, we're all individuals, but we're all contributing to the team at the same time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, another good thing for us to do, Paul, is look at especially since we don't have our other hosts with us today, we can make a little more time for looking at the questions at the end of each section that our reader would be engaging in as an exercise. So, for example, in this section on the individual, the first question is, what makes you, as a character in your success story, stand out? And this is where, in the book, The Blueprint to Your Personal Success Story, each reader or participant or student, if you like, would then have an opportunity to take a journal and work in their journal and take some time doing what we're doing right now, kind of discussing this subject or thinking about this subject, thinking more deeply about this word and how it applies to them and how they feel that it impacts their own life. So the first question would be, what makes you as a character in your success story stand out? The second question is, what distinguishes you from others in your field or area of interest? So I think maybe that's kind of a similar question turned on its head a little bit, but I think both are important. In your story, and we talked about this recently in our other podcast on Make Your Own Damn Cheese, about blue sky thinking. Mm-hmm. Again, when we talk about your success story, we tap into a concept called blue sky thinking. How would your life look as an individual if it were perfect in every way? Mm-hmm. Where would you live? what kind of work would you do? What level of education would you have? How much would you weigh? What would your blood pressure be? What would your cholesterol be? How much savings would you have in your retirement account? What income would you aspire to? Who would you like to be with? What would your personal relationship situation look like? Etc. So this is your story. This is your success story. And that's what we're helping you to build through this vocabulary that's in the blueprint to your personal success story. And so when we say what makes your character stand out in the story, that's what we're talking about. How do you bring that blue sky version of your own life, that perfect sunny day version of your own life, to fruition, of course, and we emphasize this again and again, without injuring, harming, or stepping on anybody else's toes, without impeding anybody else's progress. It's if you could live the life of your dreams, what would that look like, and how would you get there? And then, in this case, as an individual, what role would you play in bringing that to fruition? What we also call, Paul, in Make Your Own Damn Cheese, the concept of transmutation, taking an imaginary circumstance in the conscious mind and thinking about it so much that it percolates through what we call the psychic barrier into the subconscious mind, and we fall in love with those ideas. That becomes what we call the emotional mind. The subconscious mind is the emotional mind. The heart, as the ancient Greeks used to call it, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, the old text says. So that becomes the self-concept of the individual, the self-image, the self-concept. And that self-concept will then drive the habitual behaviors of that individual to bring forth the results. And then your environment becomes, as James Allen said, your looking glass, or the mirror of how you've been thinking most of the time. And so that's kind of bringing everything together nicely, I think, in this passage.
Yeah, very much so. The only other thing I wanted to add, because I've been asked about this before, is you take somebody like an artist. They're in the room, they're in the studio all alone, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and they create whatever they create, art, masterpieces. In fact, you're an artist as well, so you know how that works. You kind of need to be alone when you're creating. And they say, well, there's an individual who made it successfully as an artist. And I've always reminded them, no, they didn't really do it alone. You know, first of all, they had training, they had teachers, they had a team behind them to begin with to get them to that place. But then you have to worry about selling the art. You know, you have to get a management team, maybe a finance person, depending on how big you are, how big you want to go. So even the most extreme example of an individual, you're still part of a team at the end of the day, right?
Very much so. And it's a very, again, it's a subject I'm very much interested in, fine art and creative arts and visual arts. Yeah. And to your point, this is certainly not to disagree with you. I agree with you completely. But a caveat is that we know throughout history that in many instances, the scenario that you described, which I think is the scenario that most of us envision, of the artist working alone, is actually not the case in many, 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 many circumstances. Especially for the more successful career artist, excuse me, for the more successful career artist, in the sense that those artists almost always have studio assistants and helpers and so forth, actually in the studio, helping them to create art. To the extent, and that going back to the time of Michelangelo and so on and so forth, and the Sistine Chapel, this is not just a new or current phenomenon. They had tremendous numbers of helpers preparing paint, preparing, in that case, even trellises and scaffolds to get up to the ceiling, workmen, artisans, etc. People cleaning brushes, people helping with design, people, all kinds of roles, especially when we come to I could say especially when you come to, let's say, sculptural work, bronzes and things that, let's say, require foundries and artisans who actually physically might turn a wax model or a clay model into a bronze. So, to your point, there is, and it's a beautiful example, really, there is certainly an emphasis on the individual and the imaginative power of the individual, but the creative power of the individual, and you know, Paul, I like that distinction very much, the difference between imagination and creation, or imagination and creativity. They are not the same thing. Imagination is what exists in the conscious mind, in the thinking mind, in the mind's eye. Creativity is the transmutation of that image into the physical realm. The person who can see the sports car in his mind, that's one thing. That's an advantage over the person who can't. Not everybody is imaginative, by the way, right. At least in adulthood. Probably in childhood we all are, but a lot of that is kind of, I guess, worked out of us, or it erodes over time because it's not encouraged, and it's not nurtured or nourished, really. Yeah. And so it kind of dies within us. It dies on the vine within us and somewhere in childhood. So not everybody is imaginative. So having a strong imagination is a wonderful thing to begin with. So you can imagine writing a book like the one that I wrote.
Yeah.
But to create it, I can assure you, is a heck of a lot of work. And
definitely.
And in doing so, it oftentimes, although I wrote this book, every word of it, then you work with editors, and you work with publishers, and you work with sometimes audio talents or voice talents like yourself, as our audience should know that Paul did the voice version, the audio version of my book, The Straight A Handbook. So you're working with other talents and other creative people and other individuals, as you pointed out, to bring that imaginary thing, whether it's a painting, a book, a song, a business, an architectural structure, a building, to bring that to life in the physical realm often takes a team of people. And in the world of art, to the extent that many of the great artists throughout history, and certainly many of the contemporary artists who are alive today, no longer even produce the art with their own hands. They have only their assistants and artisans creating the work, because, in some cases, that almost becomes secondary, in their mind at least, to the imaginative aspect of the work. The creative aspect becomes somewhat technical and mundane. And certainly a perfect example of that would be the composer in music.
Right.
He doesn't have to play every piece himself, or certainly herself, or every instrument within the orchestra. They're seeing and hearing the music in their mind, transposing it on paper, and then those notes get played elsewhere around the world and are subject to interpretation, etc. And even the notation onto the paper can be handed to somebody else. I'm reminded of the great scene from Amadeus, the movie about Mozart, where he is dictating basically the music when he's sick in bed to the other composer, the Italian composer whose name escapes me at the moment. And so he's basically saying, bum, 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 and saying, don't you see it, don't you see it? And he's trying to keep up by transcribing it. So even the transcription or the writing of the physical music doesn't have to necessarily be done by the composer, by the artist. It's a fascinating subject, really.
Yeah, it really is. And very well said. No matter how much of an individual you are, you still need a team. And that's basically the bottom line, right?
Correct. If you have to have a team around you to some degree at some point, as you said, if not for no other reason, to share the information with the world. Here's my book that I wrote, and many people were involved in the final version, editors and proofreaders and so forth. And I have a publisher I work with who will eventually get this book, published and out there into the public realm. But then I work with you, and I work with Diane, and I work with Deborah to bring more life to the subject and to discuss it. And then our listeners and our viewers are important, very important participants in that process of the book. If no one reads the book, it's the story of the tree in the forest. If the tree falls in the forest with no one there to hear it, does it make any noise? Well, if you write a book that nobody's ever read, is it really a book?
That's right.
Right? If nobody ever hears the music, is it really a song? Right. So it becomes a very, very fascinating subject. And on that subject, I would give the example of, again, visual art and fine art. One of the world's most successful, at least commercially successful, living artists right now is an American artist by the name of Jeff Koons, Koons. And I was watching an interview with Jeff Koons one day, and he said, well, the art doesn't really happen on the wall. Like, for example, there's a large painting behind me, which was a very generous gift from a very dear friend. Now, I like the painting very much. I appreciate it very much, but many people may not, and that's their prerogative to do so. Just like music, just like food, just like clothing, style, fashion, so many things is a matter of taste. It's a matter of taste. It's a matter of choice. And tastes can change over time as well. But the point that Koons was making is that the painting itself that hangs on the wall is neither good nor bad, and it's not art. The art can only occur in the eye and the mind and the opinion and the taste of the viewer. That's where the art actually happens, inside of the viewers, just as music, judged as good, bad, or indifferent, happens inside the ear and the mind of the listener. Jeff Koons, who's one of the most successful contemporary living artists, he's an American artist, Jeff Koons, Koons, he said, I thought, a very interesting remark in an interview I was watching one day, that the art doesn't really occur on the wall, for example, like the painting behind me. Somebody may like the painting, somebody may not like the painting, somebody may be indifferent, somebody may think it's absolutely terrible, and so forth. How would anybody ever hang that in their home? I happen to love this painting. It was a gift from a very dear friend, a very generous gift from a very dear friend, so I cherish it. But as Mr. Koons said, the art doesn't happen on the wall, on the canvas. It actually happens inside the viewer. It's a matter of taste, just as music would be the same. Music is neither good nor bad. It's what the listener has become accustomed to and enjoys. There are so many different styles and genres of music and different ethnic music from around the world and throughout different periods of time and history, etc. And the same would be said for food. I might not like your mother's lasagna, Paul, but that doesn't mean that it's not good lasagna or that you don't like it. It just means that I don't care for it because it's not what I became accustomed to. So it's a matter of taste, which is why, frankly, I think it's such a nice philosophy to adopt, if you can. It's a real sign of, I think, maturity and personal development to say, rather than, oh, did you try Paul's lasagna? It was really terrible. It was horrible. As opposed to saying, I didn't care for it. It wasn't my cup of tea. Those are two very different things. Because obviously you and your family presumably really likes your lasagna. It just may be very different from what I'm accustomed to. So I'm not anticipating that, the flavor profile, et cetera, et cetera. So for me to judge it as bad is very shallow thinking. And I think that if more of us, certainly I've tried to do that in my own life over the years, could say, it's not my cup of tea. I don't care for it, but that's okay. That Doesn't make it bad. I'm not here to judge somebody's painting, somebody's music, somebody's lasagna, somebody's style of dress, whatever it is. That comes down again to the power of the individual to choose, and you have your own tastes and likes and dislikes.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with all, and very well said. Do you want to move on to the next word, sir? Integrity?
I certainly think we
All
should.
right.
Yeah. Integrity is a noun, and the definition is the quality of being honest and fair. Winners have integrity. They're honest and fair in their dealings with others. But this in no way should be confused with weakness. Being fair does not mean you should be a pushover. People with integrity stand their ground and expect others to deal with them in the same manner they themselves behave. When it comes to success, the individual who conducts themselves with integrity stands by any agreement they make and insists that anyone with whom he associates does the same. A track record of broken promises can only lead to failure. Overcommitting, even with the best of intentions, always ends poorly when you're incapable of holding up your end of the bargain. You're better served to underpromise and overdeliver, as the adage goes. This will help to bolster your reputation and leave no one walking away feeling shortchanged after having dealt with you. And then we have a quote from Albert Camus, who lived between 1913 and 1960. He was a French author, journalist, philosopher, and Nobel Prize winner, who said, "Integrity has no need of rules," which I think is really a wonderful quote.
Yeah. All right.
I think it implies that integrity is on its face what it is. You know, if somebody has to start defining integrity for you and making a certain set of rules or circumstances to behave within, then you've obviously kind of lost the point of what it means to have integrity or live in a culture of integrity.
Yeah. I'm probably too way far over the line to the integrity side. Not only, well, I try to be that myself, but I make those demands of others. You talk about the word, you've heard, I'm sure you know the word pragmatic. There are a lot of people who are pragmatic. Okay, this guy didn't hold up his end of the bargain this time, but I'll give him another shot next time because it's good for business, or he lied to me 3 times, but I still need this out of him, so I'll keep working with him. And I've always struggled with that. It's like, if you tank it on me once, probably not going to come back to you unless I'm really desperate. And even then, and for years I had my own band, on the side. It wasn't part of what I did as my career. But if I hired a guy, like, okay, we have a gig on August 1st, and he says, yeah, great, I'll be there. Okay, give him directions, you do whatever you have to do. And a few days before August 1st, he calls, well, son of a gun, I can't make it after all. Well, in the musician business, what that means is he got a better offer somewhere else. More money, less travel, whatever. It's a better deal for him. And so I made it a vow. I never told anybody, but that guy would never work with me again. I would never call him ever again because I know that I can't trust him or count on him, whether he was dishonest or lacked integrity or lacked responsibility. He can deal with that on his own and with his loved ones. But as far as I'm concerned, not going to deal with him, even if he was a really great player. And that's where the pragmatic part comes. Like, oh, guy's a great sax player. I'll try him again. I don't. I never did. How do you see that playing into it when you deal with people who don't have integrity? Do you keep going back to that same well, hoping they'll get religion when it comes to integrity? Or do you just say, they don't have it. I need to fill my world, my office, my environment with people who do?
Well, again, I think this comes down to an individual choice, the choice of the individual, and how strict or stern each of us is going to be in our relationships and our interpersonal interactions with other people. I certainly can see your point of view because you are a person of great integrity, and having worked with you for a long period of time now, I know that that's true. When you say you're going to do something, you do it, and so forth. So you hold yourself to an extremely high standard, and you hold the people that you're going to work with to an extremely high standard.
Right.
So I resonate with that. The other side of that coin is certainly that none of us is perfect. The old saying that he without sin shall cast the first stone, or people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So I do tend to be, I don't know if pragmatic is the word. I don't want to be, I'm not a pushover, as I say in my little essay here, but I do think that there's a place for forgiveness, and I think that there's a place for second chances. And that brings us to another great old aphorism, which says, I'll clean it up. I'm from New Jersey, but I'll clean it up for our listeners, which is, let's say, do me wrong once, shame on you. Do me wrong twice, shame on me. So I think that we all deserve a second chance, unless you see that there's some glaring, moralistic, ethical sort of bankruptcy in a person's personality that that there's no way they're ever going to behave properly or clean things up or turn themselves around. But generally speaking, people do have moments where they don't perform at their best, they don't necessarily keep their word, even if their intentions are good, and they might miss out on a obligation of one kind or another. And so I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I'm pragmatic in that way. If I feel that there's value there, and I'll give them a second chance. But I would say rarely, if ever, I would say rarely, a third. Once you have a track record, then that becomes your track record. But anybody can kind of drop the ball once, and I think under the right circumstances, it can be a learning experience, and many people will do better in the future. But again, this becomes a personal choice of the individual in how they're going to interact with others, and it becomes your ability to analyze and assess the character and the integrity or lack of integrity in the other individual with whom you're interacting. So it's, again, I think like so many of these words, kind of a complicated subject, and there's a lot to think about. And that's the purpose of the book, to really get into the nitty-gritty of language and terms and words that we tend to kind of just throw around that probably require or deserve a little bit more respect or consideration.
Right. I guess I draw a line on my end between those who, made a mistake or didn't quite measure up to snuff, even though they promised they would. That's different than somebody who intentionally goes against their own word. And the example I used about the musician, and this happened once, phenomenal sax player. Yes, I'll be there. I even called him a couple of days, 2 or 3 days before. Don't forget, the gig this weekend. Here's the time. He might, oh, yeah, I'll be there. And then called me the next day or two and said, well, son of a gun, I can't make it. And I did find out, because in that community, like even the medical community, any community, is kind of small and everybody knows everybody. And I found out he had taken another gig and made more money. Okay, that's not really a mistake. That's an intentional act on his part, and left me holding the bag after I had made some promises. As opposed to somebody who makes a mistake. And I had a guy one time, he was supposed to be at a place at 3:00 p.m., didn't show up the day before cell phones and texting. So when you don't show up, there's no way to get a hold of anybody other than their house phone. Tried his house phone, no answer. He had called me about 9:00, so 6 hours later, and said he had been ill. He had fallen asleep, and I knew it was true because somebody else had the same issue with him that same day. And so, of course, somebody like that, I always give another chance to. Now, you don't want to get sick every time you promise to be somewhere with me. But certainly, mistakes happen, life happens, we understand that. But that's different than somebody who says, Paul offered me this, I said yes, but somebody offered me a little bit more at the last minute, so to heck with Paul, I'm going to move on. Those are the people I tend to not bring back into the circle. Does that make any sense, or is that even too harsh in your book?
No, that makes sense. I mean, when it's intentional and the person knows that it's going to really damage you or put you in a compromised situation, then I think that person gets one strike and is out.
Okay. Yeah.
Quite frankly, yeah.
And that's what I meant about not pragmatic and, the integrity. If you're going to say you're going to do it, then you need to do it. And if you can't, if life happens, everybody understands that. As long as it doesn't happen every single time, that becomes an issue as
Right,
well.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Any other thoughts on integrity, sir?
No, I think we're good there.
We are flying through today. How about your next word in your book is invention? Take it from there.
Okay. Invention is, I think, one of my favorite words. I have so many favorite words. I just like the word very much. Let's put it that way. Invention is a noun, and the definition is the act or process of creating or producing something useful for the first time. Excuse me. And then my short essay on invention. Not every winner is an inventor, as we would typically think of such a label. Not every superachiever need be like Thomas Edison or Alexander Graham Bell. The image of the brilliant tinkerer with tousled hair, a wild look in their eyes, and a white laboratory coat standing at a laboratory bench with Bunsen burners throwing flames is not necessary to be an inventor. Invention takes on many meanings, many guises. The act of being creative and coming up with new ideas or solutions to problems is inventive. Typically, the greatest invention of any highly productive person is themselves. They see a vision of who they'd like to be in their mind's eye and then bring that individual into being through hard work, practice, training, and determination. The little boy invents a picture of himself as a great statesman, standing at a lectern, delivering a great oration, where he sees himself as the starting pitcher for the world champion Chicago Cubs. A little girl stands before the mirror in knee socks and short-sleeved dress at age 9, but sees in her reflection a 35-year-old highly decorated submarine commander. These inventions of the mind are what guide us. These inventions are the blueprints by which we will design and build our realities. Inventing a self-image is a critical first step if you are to be a pharmacological research scientist. You must first believe that you are intellectually and academically capable of such a calling prior to doing the bench research that will ultimately lead to a cure for cancer. Successful people are always inventing new things in their heads before they exist in the real world. They invent who they will be, where they will go to school, what degrees they will earn, how much money they will make, where they will live, what car they will drive, what type of spouse they will marry, what kind of business they will be in. These inventions of the human imagination are the most powerful and valuable known to mankind. You must first invent the idea of landing on the moon before inventing the lunar lander. Let your inventive capacity run wild. Never curtail what your mind tells you it wants or is capable of. Invent yourself and your life first in your magnificent brain, and the rest will follow with persistence and industriousness. And then we come to a quote from Plato, who lived from 428 to 348 BC. He was the Greek philosopher and mathematician. And he said, necessity, the mother of invention.
That's true. If we don't need it, why invent it? Because no one's going to buy it anyway, right? If we don't need it.
Yeah, and I like the lesson plan at the end of this because it's very open-ended. The instruction for the reader and the student would be, your assignment here is simple. Start inventing right here, right now. Yeah. And then there's space provided for writing. So start inventing yourself, start inventing your story, start inventing your future, start inventing your character, start inventing that blue sky vision of your own personal success story.
Almost anybody can say almost anything and get on the mountaintop and pontificate, you should do this, I think you ought to do this, you'll be better if you do that. And then there are some people who literally have been there and done that. They can say, do this because I did it and it's worked out really well. And that's my preface to saying you're a living example of that, John. You went to school to be a surgeon. That was a magnificent achievement, a series of achievements just to get to that point. But then you thought in your head, to invent another career, and you're still in the surgery area, but it's totally different than what you originally went to school for. and then the whole Vita Support MD. How many doctors actually go out and create a business that produces vitamins? I guess I'm guessing the percentage is really, really small because they're too busy doing other things or their minds go elsewhere. But you had a vision. You thought, I could come up with something here and pull a team together and research that will help people. And then not to mention the Chuback Medical and, of course, all the books. I don't know how many physicians actually sit down and write books that are non-medical books, but you certainly do. And so you've had these visions all of the time, haven't you, in terms of leading to invention? Maybe that's why it's one of your favorite words, because you do it all the time.
Yes, well, thank you, Paul. I mean, that makes me feel good. Obviously, I appreciate that. I think that I was always an imaginative child, and that was fostered. I had a good education. I had a great start to life. A great mother and father who I think supported me in my imagination and creativity and in the arts and so forth, although neither of them was really particularly involved in that, but they certainly encouraged me and never dissuaded me. And so I think that I got off to a very good start, and I was fortunate in that way. And then I think it's become something that has become part of the fabric of myself and my being as an individual, again, going back to today's first word. But what I love so much is sharing that with people, is sharing with them that, as you know, again, this is one of my personal beliefs. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Again, it won't be everybody's cup of tea, and I'm not, as I say so many times, I have no movement to join. We're not looking for, followers, or disciples, but I do believe that we're spiritual beings, having a physical experience in this life, and that we are co-creators with the Creator. And we were given this magnificent mind and this magnificent ability of creation. And so whether it's creating music or creating a building or creating a business or creating a painting or creating a family or creating a friendship, we have this extraordinary ability that it doesn't seem any of the other little animals and creatures that live amongst us on the planet have. Right. Yes, a bird can create a nest and a beaver can create a dam, but those are instinctual behaviors. I don't think that a bird has any choice in the nest that it builds, the type of nest. One species of bird builds one kind of nest, and another species of bird builds another type of nest. But I don't believe there's any species of bird who looks at another species' nest and says, that might be a little bit more comfortable, a little more spacious, a little more practical for what we're doing here. I don't, it sounds funny, but I don't think that there's any other animal that has that incredible gift. So I have tried, I think once I've become cognizant of that, as I grew and matured and climbed the ladder of human personhood that we talk about, tipping my hat to Sir John Eccles, who introduced me to that phrase and that philosophy, climbing the ladder of human personhood. I think this sense of self-expression and creativity is an incredible gift, and I think that invention, the inventive mind, is central to that process. And sadly, you and I have talked about this many times, Paul, because you are an educator. For whatever reason, it seems that so much of that inventiveness or invention that is really our birthright as human persons gets somehow wrung out of us and distilled out of us at an early age. So that's why I push myself as an adult to try to be the most self-actualized individual that I can be. I try to paint and I try to draw and I try my hand at music, Um, as you know, I'm studying with a classical guitar teacher, and I'm by no means a great guitarist, but I'm trying to develop that part of my mind and that part of my personality and that part of my inventiveness and self-expression and co-creation. Um, I've built businesses, as you said. I do have a patent, the United States patent on a football design that's meant to prevent head injuries and cervical spine injuries. And none of that is because I feel that I am any more gifted or intelligent or capable than anybody else. I give all of the credit to that, I think, tendency towards self-expression and invention to this material, what I refer to as the personal development genre, the personal development philosophy, positive psychology, and personal development uh, uh, area of learning and of study. And I've been studying this for more than 20 years now, and it's had such a magnificent impact on my own life and my experience as an individual in this world that, as you know, that has become a tremendous motivation for me to share this philosophy and approach to life with as many people as will listen, quite frankly.
I cannot imagine you going to the office or the hospital or whatever you used to do, doing your whole surgery thing and just coming home and sitting on the couch and watching TV until it was time to go to bed. You just don't strike me as that kind of guy. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I was always curious. I think curiosity is a very important concept. I think we went over curiosity already. I think I was always curious about the human mind, about the human experience, about all those big existential questions that people have been asking since the dawn of time. Why am I here? Who am I? What am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going next, if any place? Yeah. And sort of those deep, profound spiritual questions, I think, came naturally to me even in childhood, which might have been a little bit unusual. I don't know. I mean, I don't really know how much other children thought about that. But I think that I certainly thought more about it than other children. I mean, having raised my own children and so forth, I don't think that they were particularly motivated or focused on those kinds of questions, which in some ways I think is good because they're difficult questions. And I think as a young person, I struggled with some of those questions, but it did lead to a lifetime of curiosity and inquisitiveness and a desire to learn more about this overall experience of what, again, Dr. Eccles called human personhood, being a human person as opposed to being a human being. He said we're all born perfectly equal as human beings. We're all Homo sapiens sapien with the same genetic makeup, the same DNA, the same number of chromosomes, etc. But as human persons, there are differences between us, and we climb this ladder of human personhood. And I've become, quite obviously very, very interested in that subject.
Well, is it safe to say, and I think it is, if you go out there and do what everybody else has done for the last 50 years or 100 years, whatever, in whatever you're doing, a profession or anything in life, you'll probably end up getting about the same results that they got if you're halfway decent at it. But if you want to move forward or make it better or somehow improve or do it in less time for more money, then you do have to be somewhat inventive. And that doesn't mean inventing the lunar lander, as you mentioned a few moments ago, or inventing the light bulb. But it does mean being somewhat having an inventive mind, doesn't it? To find different ways to do things to have better results.
Yes, and again, I think that we are structured that way. You and I, we talk a lot about the mind, and this is kind of getting a little bit deep, which is fine. Mm-hmm. As you know, my wife Diane has a degree in psychobiology, undergraduate degree from NYU in psychobiology, and then from the University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey. She has a degree, PhD in neurochemistry. And so she knows a lot about the brain, and a tremendous amount about the brain and the mind. And these are two different subjects. Probably a little bit heavy to get into in any depth here today as we're kind of coming to the end of today's program, but the brain is a 3-pound organ that lives inside of your skull, like a kidney or a heart or a liver or a spleen. The mind is more of an activity. It's not your brain. And this is something that human persons have been thinking about and pondering and wrestling with and trying to understand, again, I think since the beginning of time. Every little animal out in nature, not every little animal, but most of the higher animals, of course, mammals and so forth, have a brain. But I don't believe that they have a mind in the sense that we have a mind. We are, I believe, like many animals, conscious, but I believe we're the only animal that is conscious of the fact that they are conscious.
Right.
And that's a big difference. And that's sort of where the mind comes in, where you can be introspective, where you can be reflective, where you can ask questions like, where did I come from? Where am I going? What is my purpose here? How did this all start? I don't think highly developed animals like dogs and whales and chimpanzees and so forth have those kinds of thoughts enter their central nervous system. So it's a very, very interesting subject, but again, bringing it full circle to your comment, I think this magnificent mind that we have all been blessed with in childhood is geared toward that creativity, invention, imagination, daydreaming, fantasy, fantasizing, playing movies in our head, so to speak, and staring out the classroom window and seeing images of wonderful things, but that gets kind of, again, educated out of us, unfortunately, in a way, and distilled out of us, and it's pay attention, and, probably more children are being diagnosed with ADD than really have ADD. They're probably just being normal children, and they're distracted by not only what's outside the window, but what's going on inside their own magnificent mind that might be more interesting at the time than long division, which is being done on, when I was in school, the blackboard with a piece of chalk, but I don't think there's any blackboard anymore. Now there's a smart board or something. Yeah. So anyhow, to answer your question, yes, I think that I had that tendency, but I think we all have that tendency, and I think that to a great degree, unfortunately, the vast majority of us have that kind of wrung out of us somehow, very early on.
And that brings us to the end of today's show, episode 10, The Blueprint to Your Success Story, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chuback, physician-surgeon from New Jersey. And Dr. Chuback, thank you very much, sir. An excellent job as always, and we will begin next time with episode 11.
Thanks so much, Paul. It was a good conversation today. Of course, we missed our co-hosts, but we hope to see them both back very soon. And if not, because everybody has a very busy schedule out there, and we understand that, you and I will plod along together on this journey. And again, as I've said before, I can't speak for anybody else, our listeners, our viewers, but certainly I learn a lot every time we have this discussion. It's what we call the third mind process. By discussing, we both have new enlightenments and greater awareness.
Yep, yeah, definitely so, and very well said, as always. Thank you, sir. See you next time, episode 11. Have a great day.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.